Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This insight is not just poetic, it is deeply practical, especially in moments of confrontation. What we experience in conflict is rarely just about the external situation. It is a mirror, revealing the hidden parts of our psyche that we would rather not face. The anger, the defensiveness, the desire to control. All of it arises not merely from what is happening, but from what is happening within us. If we approach confrontation unconsciously, we react. We are swept away by emotion, trapped in a cycle of blame and resistance. But if we approach it consciously, with awareness, presence, and a willingness to observe rather than be consumed, we find something entirely different. We find that every moment of conflict can be transformed into a moment of insight. It becomes a doorway into the deeper layers of the self. This is not a theory born of abstraction, it is a path forged through deep observation of human nature, and it is the very path Carl Jung walked and invited others to walk. To stay calm in confrontation is not merely to master behavior, it is to meet the shadow, to hold space for complexity, and to respond from the wholeness of who we are. Let us begin there. You see, in every confrontation, whether it's with a colleague, a loved one, or even a stranger, our first instinct is usually to react. That reaction often doesn't come from a calm, measured place. It comes from somewhere deeper, murkier, often hidden even from ourselves. And that's where your work begins, with knowing yourself. It's a phrase we hear so often that we stop listening to it. Know yourself. But let me ask you this. How much of yourself do you truly know? Not the polished mask you wear in public, not the roles you play, not the version of you that you think others expect. I'm talking about the parts of you that lie beneath, the unspoken feelings, the unacknowledged desires, the insecurities you've buried because they made you uncomfortable. You carry within you something I call the shadow. It's not evil, it's not wrong. It's simply the parts of yourself you've disowned, rejected, or never had the chance to fully understand. And when you enter into confrontation, when someone threatens your sense of self or challenges your perspective, the shadow often steps in before you do. That's the voice that says, "How dare they speak to me like that?" That's the rising tension in your chest, the urge to lash out, to defend, to dominate or retreat. It doesn't come from reason. It comes from within, from what you haven't made conscious yet. So the first step in staying calm in any confrontation is not about tactics or techniques. It's about awareness, self-awareness that is real and raw, not just intellectual understanding, but emotional intimacy with your own inner world. When you feel triggered, pause and ask, what part of me feels threatened right now? It's rarely about the other person. More often, they've simply touched a part of you that you've never fully faced. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone accuses you of being incompetent. You react sharply, you defend, maybe you raise your voice. But pause. What if part of you secretly fears that accusation is true? What if you've spent your whole life trying to prove your worth, and this comment simply hit that nerve? Now you see, it's not about them, it's about something unresolved within you. And if you're unaware of that, you'll always be reacting from that hidden wound, not from clarity. But once you recognize it, once you make the unconscious conscious, you gain a choice. You can say to yourself, there it is, that part of me that still feels not enough. I see you. And when you do that, something powerful happens. You create space. And in that space, you are no longer a puppet to your emotions. You can choose how to respond rather than react. Now, this doesn't mean you let others walk over you. It doesn't mean you suppress your feelings or pretend to be unaffected. Quite the opposite. It means you understand where those feelings come from, and by owning them, you free yourself from their grip. You can express what you feel without becoming consumed by it. You can stand your ground without losing your center. Knowing yourself is not a weekend exercise, it is a lifelong unfolding. But each time you confront your own shadow with honesty and compassion, you reclaim a little more of your strength. Each time you notice your emotional reactions and trace them inward rather than outward, you deepen your calm. And that calm is not passive, it's a form of power. The power to remain rooted when others are ungrounded, the power to stay open when others close off, the power to act from wisdom rather than impulse. So the next time you find yourself in a heated moment, don't focus on controlling the other person. Turn inward. Look at what is being stirred in you. What fear, what memory, what belief is coming up for air. Name it, own it, and you will no longer be at its mercy. The work begins with you. The confrontation is not the battlefield is within. But when you win there, nothing outside can truly shake you. Now, once you've begun the process of knowing yourself, of recognizing your shadow, and becoming familiar with the inner terrain of your emotional life, something else becomes clear. You begin to notice just how often your reactions in a confrontation are driven by something very specific: your ego. That part of you that clings to identity, to pride, to control. The part that wants to be right, to be seen, to be safe. And this ego, while it has its purpose, becomes a noisy, restless force in the heat of conflict. It's the voice that insists, I must defend myself, even when nothing is truly under attack. It's the voice that whispers, they need to see I'm right, as if being right ever brought peace to the soul. You've heard that voice. We all have. It speaks in 100 small ways every time we feel slighted, disrespected, or misunderstood. But here's the truth. Most confrontations are not actually about the issue at hand. They're about the ego's need to assert itself. Think of how many arguments escalate not because of what was said, but because of how it made someone feel about themselves. The ego confuses disagreement with disrespect. It treats criticism as a threat to identity. And when the ego takes control, calmness becomes nearly impossible. You're no longer present. You're performing. You're protecting an image of yourself, not engaging in the moment. To stay calm, then, you must learn to observe the ego without getting lost in it. This is not easy. The ego is clever. It disguises itself as righteousness, as logic, as strength, but its core motive is fear. Fear of being wrong, of being weak, of being diminished. And when you can see that, when you can sit with the discomfort of your ego being challenged and not react from it, you gain a kind of freedom that cannot be faked. Imagine you're in a conversation that starts to turn. Someone raises their voice, they accuse, misrepresent, provoke. The ego will rise quickly. It will urge you to interrupt, to push back, to win. But if you've cultivated even a small space between your awareness and your ego, you can pause. You can watch that impulse rise and let it pass like a wave. You can choose to say less, not out of weakness, but because your strength no longer depends on proving anything. This doesn't mean you lose your sense of self. It means your sense of self is no longer fragile. It's not built on the shifting sands of other people's opinions or the unstable need for approval. Instead, it rests deeper, in something more grounded, what I call the self. A deeper presence within you that is not reactive, that does not fear silence, and that understands the difference between being respected and needing to be right. The ego deals in conflict because it thrives on separation. It needs me versus you in order to feel important. But the self, your truer center, knows that confrontation can be connection if approached without ego. It sees the other person not as a threat, but as another expression of the same human condition, flawed, emotional, and searching. When you speak from this place, your words carry a different energy. You are no longer defending a position. You're speaking truth without aggression. You are no longer trying to control the outcome. You're allowing space for mutual understanding, even if agreement never comes. And people feel this. They respond differently when your energy changes. You might be surprised how often the tense moment diffuses, not because you out-argued someone, but because you stopped fueling the fire. Of course, this requires practice. You must catch yourself in the moment, not hours later, not after the damage is done. And that begins by making it a habit to observe your inner reactions before they become outer ones. Ask yourself often, who is speaking right now? My ego or my deeper self? And listen. The difference is clear when you're willing to hear it. Letting go of the ego is not about disappearing. It's about no longer needing to prove your existence through struggle. It's the art of presence over performance. And in confrontation, presence is your greatest ally. It allows you to remain centered while others lose their balance. It grants you the clarity to respond without harm, to disagree without disrespect, to walk away without resentment. Because in the end, calm is not the absence of conflict, it's the absence of ego within it. There's a subtle but powerful shift that happens when you stop seeing the other person in a confrontation as your enemy and begin to see them as a mirror. It's easy to point the finger outward, to judge, to blame, to analyze what's wrong with them. But when you do that, you miss something vital, what they're showing you about yourself. Every person you meet, especially the ones who challenge you, reflects something back to you. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's uncomfortable, but always there's something to learn if you're willing to look with honesty. When you feel triggered by someone's behavior, ask yourself, why this person? Why this reaction? What part of me is being stirred? That moment of reflection breaks the cycle of blame and turns confrontation into self-discovery. Often, the traits that annoy us most in others are the very ones we deny or repress in ourselves. You may find yourself irritated by someone's arrogance, but maybe there's a part of you that has never allowed itself to feel confident. You may feel anger towards someone's passivity, yet perhaps you've buried your own fear of being too soft, too vulnerable. What you haven't accepted within, you'll almost always project out. And so, the confrontation becomes a gift, not because it's pleasant, but because it reveals something you couldn't have seen on your own. It invites you to explore your unconscious, to face the parts of yourself you've tried to ignore. And when you take this view seriously, something changes in the energy of the interaction. You stop needing the other person to be wrong in order for you to feel right. You stop attacking and start inquiring. You begin to ask, what am I learning here? That doesn't mean you excuse harmful behavior. It doesn't mean you let others mistreat you. But it does mean you reclaim your power by turning your gaze inward. You stop being a victim of other people's actions and become a participant in your own evolution. That shift alone can disarm the tension in even the most difficult exchange. Consider this. Someone accuses you unfairly, perhaps raises their voice or questions your integrity. You feel the heat rise inside you. The instinct is to push back, to make them feel what they've made you feel. But if you step back, just for a breath, and see this person as a mirror, you might realize they're showing you a wound you haven't healed, or a fear you haven't fully understood. Maybe they remind you of someone from your past. Maybe they reflect a version of you that you've outgrown or never accepted. When you approach confrontation with that mindset, even the most uncomfortable exchange becomes a doorway to insight. The anger, the frustration, the defensiveness, they all point towards something unspoken within you. Follow that thread. Let it lead you deeper, because in that depth, you'll find clarity. You'll begin to respond, not from habit, but from awareness. And with awareness comes compassion, not just for yourself, but for the other person as well. You start to see that they too are reacting from their own wounds, their own fears, their own shadows. Their behavior may be difficult, but it makes sense once you recognize that they, like you, are trying to navigate their own inner world. They may not have the tools, they may not have the insight, but they are human, just as you are. That realization softens the heart. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise. You can hold firm boundaries while still seeing the humanity in the person across from you. You can disagree without dehumanizing. You can stand your ground without standing in judgment. In this way, confrontation becomes less about winning or losing and more about expanding. Every difficult interaction becomes an opportunity to grow, not just in knowledge, but in wholeness. You reclaim the pieces of yourself hidden in the reflection of others, and with each encounter you become more complete, more centered, more capable of meeting the world with grace. So when the next confrontation comes, and it will, don't rush to defend or attack. Pause. Look into the mirror being held up before you. Ask what it reveals. And trust that what you find, no matter how uncomfortable, is exactly what you need in order to evolve. Because the person in front of you is never just the problem. They're also the key. There's a certain kind of strength that has nothing to do with force, nothing to do with how loudly you speak or how firmly you assert your position. It's the kind of strength that remains completely still in the middle of chaos. And that stillness is not weakness. It's power, because it comes from deep within you, untouched by the noise outside. In confrontation, people tend to get pulled outward. The energy of the other person, the tension in the room, the rising emotional charge. All of it drags your attention away from yourself. You lose touch with your center. Your breath shortens, your thoughts speed up, your body tenses. You're no longer anchored. You're reacting. And when you're reacting, you are no longer free. But if you've cultivated the practice of staying present, of finding stillness within, then something very different happens. You don't get swept away. You stay grounded. You remain alert but calm, aware but not aggressive. It's as if the storm is swirling around you, but inside there's a quiet space that the storm cannot touch. This inner stillness isn't something you can force in the heat of the moment. It must be built, little by little, through daily awareness. It comes from learning how to pause, how to breathe, how to listen not just to others, but to yourself. Your body, your emotions, the subtle signals rising within you. That pause is sacred. It's what gives you the ability to choose your response rather than be possessed by it. When you've spent time in stillness, you begin to realize that not every challenge requires your energy. Not every provocation needs an answer. Sometimes the greatest act of strength is silence. Not the silence of fear or surrender, but the silence that comes from deep clarity. A silence that says, I don't need to be disturbed by this. That kind of silence can be more commanding than any words. Stillness does not mean indifference. You're still engaged, you're still feeling, but you're not consumed. You're not trying to control the situation or the other person. You're allowing the moment to unfold while remaining rooted in yourself. You begin to notice how much of confrontation is noise. Layers of insecurity, pain, misunderstanding, and when you're still, you can see through that noise. You can speak to what's underneath it, or choose not to speak at all. Most people have never experienced this kind of presence. They are used to conflict being a battleground, a place where emotions explode and egos clash. But when you bring stillness into that space, it changes everything. The energy of the room shifts. Your calm becomes contagious. Others feel it, even if they don't understand it, and they respond to it not always immediately, but eventually. Your stillness calls something higher out of them. This inner quiet is not something that makes you passive, it sharpens you. You become more perceptive. You begin to notice what's really being said beneath the words. You see the fear behind the anger, the sadness behind the accusation. You listen with more than your ears. And from that space, you can respond in ways that disarm rather than escalate, that bring clarity rather than confusion. To live this way requires trust. Trust that your presence is enough. Trust that you don't have to overpower a situation to influence it. Trust that clarity is more effective than control. And trust doesn't come from theory. It comes from practice, from experience, from choosing stillness again and again until it becomes second nature. Even in the moments when your emotions rise, because they will, you can return to that still place. You can recognize, here is the heat again. Here is the tightness in my chest, the urge to strike back. And instead of following it, you can breathe into it. You can observe it. You can let it pass. In that moment, you reclaim your freedom. And in that freedom, you reclaim yourself. The world is full of noise. And in confrontation, that noise becomes louder, more personal, more demanding. But you don't have to meet noise with more noise. You can meet it with quiet. You can meet it with depth. You can meet it with presence. Because true calm does not come from what's happening around you. It comes from what you've cultivated within you. There is something deeply transformative about learning how to listen. Not just to words, but to what exists behind them. In confrontation, most people don't listen to understand. They listen to respond, to defend, to prepare their next argument. It becomes a battle of interruptions, a collision of voices, each one trying to be heard but none truly hearing. And in that noise, something essential is lost. To stay calm in confrontation, you must become a different kind of listener. A listener who is not merely waiting for their turn to speak, but who listens with the whole self, who listens with presence, with curiosity, and most importantly, without judgment. That kind of listening changes the energy between people. It creates space. It slows everything down, and in that space, connection becomes possible again. Listening without judgment is difficult. It requires you to set aside your assumptions. It demands that you release your grip on the need to be right. When someone says something you disagree with, or worse, something that feels like a personal attack, your instinct is to push back. But what if instead you leaned in? Not to agree, not to submit, but simply to understand, to say internally, what is really being said here? What pain, what fear, what story is speaking through this person right now? That shift changes everything. You begin to hear things differently. The insult becomes a clue. The anger becomes a signal. Even silence carries weight. You stop reacting to the surface and you begin to sense the deeper current. Maybe the person across from you isn't truly angry with you. They're afraid. Maybe they're projecting something from their past, reliving an old wound in your presence. When you listen like this, not only do you remain calm, but you also become more compassionate, not in a sentimental way, but in a clear, grounded way that allows you to navigate the moment with intelligence and care. Most people, when they are in conflict, just want to feel seen. They want to be acknowledged. They want to know that their pain, their frustration, their voice matters. And when you offer that, even silently, even without agreeing, you meet them in a place that words alone can't reach. You offer them presence. And presence is healing. It disarms people. It reminds them, often unconsciously, that they're not alone in the struggle. This kind of listening also gives you an unexpected gift. It keeps your center intact. When you stop judging what you hear, you stop reacting to it emotionally. You allow it to pass through you like wind through an open window. You may still feel the breeze, but you are not moved by it. You remain steady. That steadiness is not something you perform, it is something you become. And once you have tasted it, You won't want to go back to the old ways of arguing and defending. Even when the words being spoken are sharp, even when they are wrong or unfair, you have the power to remain anchored by choosing how you listen. You are not responsible for how the other person speaks, but you are responsible for how you receive it. And in that receiving, you can change the tone of the entire interaction. Sometimes the act of listening is more powerful than anything you could say. It creates a kind of quiet authority, not one based on control or dominance, but on understanding. And understanding doesn't require agreement. You can understand someone and still hold a different view. You can validate someone's experience without surrendering your own truth. That is the balance. That is the art. This kind of listening must be practiced in everyday moments, not just in conflict. Practice it when someone tells you a story, when a friend complains, when a stranger expresses frustration. Notice when your mind wants to interrupt, to advise, to judge. And don't follow it. Just return to your breath, to your presence, and listen. Each time you do, you strengthen that inner capacity to stay calm when it matters most. So in confrontation, let your listening be your strength. Let it be your stillness in motion. Let it be the act that disarms the moment, not by overpowering it, but by seeing into it. Because when you truly listen without judgment, you bring not just calm into conflict, you bring clarity, connection, and something even rarer, peace. One of the most overlooked truths about confrontation is that it ends not when someone wins, but when someone chooses to end the cycle. Most people carry confrontation long after the moment has passed, replaying the words in their mind, analyzing every look, every silence, every sentence that could have been said differently. The confrontation continues, not in reality, but in the psyche. And there, it festers and takes root. It steals presence and peace. What must be understood is this: in order to truly remain calm in confrontation, you have to know how to let it go once it's over. Not repress it, not bury it, but release it. And to do that, you must relinquish the need for closure that comes from outside. You must stop waiting for the apology that may never come, the validation you might never receive, the perfect ending that was never possible. The mind craves resolution. It wants to wrap conflict in a neat little bow and say, "It's done, now I can move on." But life rarely offers that. People don't always behave the way we hope. They don't always explain themselves or even understand what they triggered in us. And if you tie your inner calm to their actions, you give away your power. Letting go is not forgetting. It's not pretending nothing happened. It's recognizing that holding on is costing you more than the conflict ever did. It's understanding that peace cannot grow in a mind occupied by resentment. The longer you carry the argument, the more it becomes part of your identity. It becomes a story you tell yourself about who you are, who they are, and what happened. And that story begins to shape your perception of every future interaction. So there's a discipline in releasing. A discipline that says, "I've felt it. I've learnt from it. Now I will not let it define me." That discipline isn't cold, it's courageous, because it takes far more strength to let go of something than to keep clinging to it in the hope of controlling what's already past. Even when you've handled a confrontation well, even when you've stayed centered, listened deeply, spoken with clarity, there will still be emotions. That's human. You may feel sadness or frustration or a lingering sense of discomfort. Don't suppress it. Acknowledge it. Let it move through you. But don't give it a home. Don't feed it with more thoughts than it needs. Let it rise and let it pass. There's also wisdom in knowing that not every conflict needs to be resolved through conversation. Sometimes the resolution is internal. Sometimes the most powerful response is no longer needing to engage, not out of avoidance, but because you've already done the work within yourself. You've seen what needed to be seen. You've met yourself in the mirror the confrontation offered, and now you move forward, not because the situation is perfect, but because you no longer need it to be. What you learn through this process is that calm is a choice made again and again, especially after the confrontation ends. It's easy to slip back into patterns of rumination, to reach for the comfort of outrage or victimhood. But every time you catch yourself doing so, you have a moment of power, a moment to return to your center and say, "No, this doesn't belong here anymore." Forgiveness plays a role in this as well, not always for the other person's sake, but for your own. To forgive is to release yourself from the burden of carrying their actions. It doesn't mean you condone what happened. It means you refuse to let it live in you, to shape your thoughts, your mood, your direction. Forgiveness is not about forgetting, it's about remembering who you are when you are free from the weight of bitterness. And remember, letting go isn't a one-time act, it's a process. Some confrontations return in your memory unexpectedly. When they do, treat them gently. Don't judge yourself for revisiting them. But don't indulge them either. Breathe, observe, and remind yourself, I no longer need this to be different. Because calm is not just how you handle confrontation in the moment, it's how you carry yourself afterward. It's the ability to walk away with your dignity intact, your heart open, and your attention back on the life that's right in front of you. And the moment you do that, the moment you truly release what no longer serves, you reclaim a stillness far greater than any victory in conflict. So I invite you, begin today not by avoiding conflict, but by meeting it with awareness. Observe your reactions, sit with your discomfort, listen more deeply, breathe more slowly, and ask not only what is happening, but what is being revealed. This is how transformation begins, not through force, but through presence. Not by changing others, but by knowing yourself. Thank you.